the long-distance partner, a truck driver's, one mistake, one night, one secret that destroys everything. Tonight's story isn't soft, it isn't gentle, and it isn't the kind of tale you forget. This is the nightmare that started on a lonely stretch of highway, with a truck driver chasing comfort in the wrong place and bringing home a silent killer that would rip through the life he built for 20 years. Meet Raymond, faithful husband on paper, emotionally fractured man on the road, and Linda, his wife, his anchor, who trusted him so deeply she never imagined betrayal could come wrapped in his embrace. But when a routine doctor's call shatters their world, the truth detonates like a bomb. HIV didn't come from the outside. It came from the man she loved. This is more than a story of infidelity. It's the brutal reality of how HIV hides behind "I feel fine," how one moment of weakness echoes through someone else's bloodstream, and how guilt can eat a man alive long before the virus ever does. Buckle up. This one hits hard. This is a long-distance partner, a real-world lesson, wrapped in heartbreak, consequence, and the kind of truth nobody wants to face. Welcome to African Stories by Asada, the Cynic Driver's YouTube channel. Where are you watching from? Before we dive into the stories behind STD and HIV series, we encourage you to rate the video and tell us in the comments below if you know someone who would fall victim to infidelity and ended up being affected with sexually transmitted disease. Let us know where you are watching from. Like, share, and subscribe so that you will be the first to be notified of our next video coming up. The Long-Distance Partner. The Raymond Carter Story. I've spent 20 years behind the wheel of an 18-wheeler, and in that time I've learned one thing about the road. It gives you too much space to think. You stare ahead at the yellow lines flashing like the tick of a clock, and suddenly you're doing an autopsy on your own life. Every mistake, every regret, every unresolved feeling sits beside you in the passenger seat. I loved my wife, Linda, more than anything I had ever known, but even love can get quiet when the world between you stretches across states. Some nights, when the sky turned black and I was hours in the next town, a loneliness settled in my chest so thick it felt like breathing through water. I hated myself for even feeling it. I would grip the steering wheel tighter, reminding myself that I had a home, a marriage, and a woman who trusted me. But the silence inside the cab sometimes spoke louder than any promise I had ever made. Every long-haul driver knows the moment when fatigue and emotion mix into something dangerous. Mine usually came around the third day on the road, somewhere between Oklahoma flatland and the first green stretch in New Mexico. Those were the miles where my imagination betrayed me, when I'd start wondering if Linda ever got tired of waiting, if my absence made her feel more like a widow than a wife. I knew those thoughts weren't fair. She was loyal, steady, unwavering. But long-distance living plays tricks on the mind. You start inventing stories about the ones you love, stories that fill the distance because you can't fill it with your presence. I would hear her voice in my head telling me she missed me, and instead of comfort, it brought guilt. Guilt that I wasn't home enough. Guilt that she deserved better. Guilt that I wasn't giving her the life she had imagined when she married me at 22. And guilt, I learned, can slowly chip away at the guardrails you swear will never break. The night everything changed wasn't special. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't even particularly tempting. It was just another stop on another route after another 14-hour stretch that left my bones humming with exhaustion. I pulled into a roadside bar outside Amarillo, one of those places with neon beer signs that flicker like a bad heartbeat. All I wanted was a hot meal and a break from the engine's constant rumble. But the moment I walked in, I felt the weight of my wedding ring more than ever. It was like it grew heavier with each step, reminding me, warning me. I took a seat alone, ordered my food, and kept my eyes on the television in the corner, determined not to let the road twist my judgment. Yet weakness doesn't announce itself. It doesn't knock. It just slips in through the cracks, the ones worn down by exhaustion, loneliness, and self-pity. I didn't go there looking for trouble. I went there looking for a moment of peace. And somehow, that made me even more vulnerable. She sat 2 stools over, the kind of woman who carried her own storms. Not young, not particularly glamorous, but warm in that way strangers sometimes are when they sense you're unraveling. She struck up the conversation, not flirtatious at first, just casual. "Long route?" she asked. I nodded, grateful for the human voice after days of nothing but radio static. I kept the talk shallow, weather, road conditions, the usual filler. But she kept inching into emotional territory, asking if I had someone waiting at home, how often I saw them, if I ever felt the weight of the miles. Each question felt like a test I was slowly failing. I mentioned Linda, but even saying her name out loud made my chest tighten with guilt. I felt like I was confessing to a priest who didn't ask for confession. When a woman placed her hand lightly over mine as she laughed at something I said, I froze. It wasn't desire I felt, just the shock of being noticed, of being seen. And loneliness, I realized too late, can disguise itself as human connection. I should have walked away right then. I should have paid my tab, gone back to my truck, and reminded myself that Linda's love had carried me through every mile of my life. But guilt twisted my thinking, made me believe that stepping away would be suspicious, that acknowledging temptation meant I had already failed. So I stayed. I stayed when she shifted one seat closer. I stayed when she asked if I wanted company for the night. And the worst part is that I heard Linda's voice in my head saying my name, not angry, not accusing, just disappointed. That's what shattered me. Before anything even happened, regret hit me like a punch. I knew I was crossing a line, knew I was betraying the one person who believed in me without hesitation. But I still followed the woman out to the motel behind the bar, every step feeling like it belonged to someone else, someone weaker, someone I didn't recognize. And yet, that someone was me. The encounter itself was brief, awkward even. There was no passion, no real desire, just two lonely people reaching for the wrong solution. The second it was over, I felt sick. Not physically, emotionally, morally, spiritually. I remember sitting on the edge of the motel bed staring at my hands like I didn't know what they were capable of anymore. I kept thinking about Linda's laugh, the way her eyes crinkled when she teased me, the softness in her voice when she said, "Drive safe." I felt like I had taken a knife to the life we built. I told myself it was a one-time lapse, something I would bury deep enough that even memory would refuse to touch it. I washed my hands obsessively, as if guilt could be scrubbed off like dirt. When I walked back to my truck, the world felt colder, sharper. I promised myself I would never stray again, that I would spend the rest of my life repenting for a moment that should never have existed. For weeks after, I lived in a state of silent torment. Every time Linda called, her voice filled me with a pain I didn't have the courage to confess. I loved her. God, I loved her. That's what made the betrayal feel like poison. I told myself that if I buried the memory deep enough, maybe it would dissolve into nothing, become a mistake forgiven by time. But guilt doesn't dissolve. It expands. I started imagining Linda, finding out even though I never told her. I imagined her face breaking. Imagine her walking away. Imagine losing the only person who had ever truly understood me. Yet even in all that fear, not once did I consider that something far worse than heartbreak had been set in motion that night. I felt healthy. I felt normal. That was the cruelest part. How easy it was to believe that consequences only belong to people living reckless lives. But consequences don't care about your lifestyle. They only care about your choices. Months passed, and life returned to its routine, at least from the outside. Inside, my guilt lived like a silent passenger in the cab. I told myself that confession would only hurt Linda, that protecting her meant keeping quiet. But lies, even lies told to shield someone, grow heavy with time. I tried to make it up to her in small ways, extra calls, surprise flowers, taking shorter routes when I could. She smiled, grateful and unsuspecting, which only deepened my shame. But underneath the surface of our everyday life, something dangerous was brewing. I had no symptoms. No warning, nothing to suggest that the night I tried so hard to forget had left me with more than guilt. So when Linda started feeling unusually tired, losing weight, and catching infections she never used to get, I chalked it up to stress. Neither of us imagined the truth, not yet, not until the day her doctor called and asked her to come in as soon as possible. I remember the day Linda got that call as clearly as the first time I saw her. We were finally on the same schedule for once. I happened to be home between runs, fixing a loose cabinet door in the kitchen when the phone rang. I watched her face as she listened, First curious, then tense, then that small nervous smile she did when she tried not to worry me. "They just want to run a few more tests," she said, waving it off. But the way her fingers trembled as she set the phone down told another story. I told her I'd drive her, that I wasn't heading out again for 2 days. She agreed, almost too quickly. On the way to the clinic, we made small talk, but the silence swelled between sentences. Somewhere in the back of my mind, a thought tried to surface. Something ugly, something I pushed back down. I held her hand in the waiting room, telling myself this was nothing serious. I needed to believe that. I needed it desperately. The doctor's office felt too bright, too clean, like it was built to expose things people would rather keep hidden. Linda sat on the exam table, feet dangling, while I took the chair beside her. When the doctor walked in with a folder pressed tight to his chest, my stomach dropped. He didn't sit right away. He looked at Linda first, then at me, his eyes careful, almost apologetic. "We got your blood work back," he said, voice steady but soft. "Linda, you're HIV positive." At first, the words didn't land. They bounced off some wall in my brain labeled impossible. Linda blinked as if she misheard. "That can't be right," she whispered. "I've been married to the same man for 20 years. The doctor nodded slowly, as if he'd heard that exact sentence 100 times. He started explaining viral loads, retesting, treatment options. I couldn't follow any of it. My ears rang. My hands went numb. All I could think was, HIV is something that happens to other people, not us. And yet, there we were. The car ride home felt like sitting inside a collapsed building. Dust in the air, beams hanging overhead, and no clear way out. Linda stared out the window, her reflection pale and distant in the glass. I kept glancing at her, opening my mouth to say something, anything, and closing it again. Finally, she spoke. "They must have mixed up the tests," she said. "There's no other explanation." She turned to me, eyes desperate. "Ray, I've never—" "You know I haven't." Her voice broke. I reached for her hand, but she pulled it back, not in anger, but in confusion, as if even touch had become suspicious. And then the question I'd been running from finally found me. If she hadn't been with anyone else, how did this happen? The answer sat between us like a bomb I'd wrapped in silence months ago. My memory flashed to that night in the motel, the guilt, the regret. For the first time, the possibility clawed at me. What if I brought this home? What if I did this to her? I tried to dismiss it at first. I told myself there had to be another way, another explanation the doctors hadn't thought of yet. Maybe a mistake at the lab, maybe some bizarre medical fluke. Anything but what my conscience whispered. Linda moved to the house like a ghost that evening, opening cabinets and closing them, sitting and standing without purpose. She finally turned to me and asked, "Do you think I should get retested somewhere else?" I clung to that idea like a life raft. "Yeah," I said quickly. "We should absolutely get a second opinion." "We." The word slipped out, and she caught immediately. "We," she repeated. "Raymond, have you been tested?" The question hung there, heavy and terrifying. I hadn't. I never thought I needed to. I always assumed feeling fine meant being fine. Now, suddenly, that assumption felt like a trap I'd walked into with my eyes closed. "No," I admitted quietly, "but I will. I'll go tomorrow." The look she gave me wasn't angry. It was worse. It was afraid. The clinic where I went for my test smelled like antiseptic and anxiety. I filled out the forms with shaking hands, my pen scratching too hard against the paper. When they asked about risk factors, I hesitated. My whole life, I would have checked the no-risk box without thinking. This time, my mind replayed that night in Amarillo in brutal detail. I checked yes. The nurse didn't judge, didn't even raise an eyebrow. She'd probably seen every story under the sun. But her calm made me feel even more exposed. The blood draw was quick, a little sting, and it was done. The waiting wasn't. They told me I could get rapid results, that I wouldn't have to come back another day. I sat in that small, sterile room staring at a poster about HIV myths and facts. One line hit me hard. You can have HIV and feel completely healthy for years. It was like the universe had written me a personal indictment. I'd been hiding behind, feeling fine without knowing it was a lie. When the counselor walked in holding a paper, my whole body tensed. Her face was professional, composed, but not detached. She introduced herself, sat down across from me, and said my name softly. Raymond. That was the moment I knew. Your test came back positive. The room tilted slightly. Not dramatically. Not like in movies where everything goes blurry, but in a small, disorienting way that made me feel unmoored. I heard myself ask practical questions. What now? How bad is it? What are the next steps? But underneath those words was a single relentless thought. Linda. I pictured her in our kitchen, in our bed, in that doctor's office hearing the same news. Only she hadn't made any reckless choices. She hadn't broken any vows. I had. The counselor talked about treatment, undetectable viral loads, living a full life. Her reassurance bounced off the shield of my guilt. You're not your mistake, she said at one point. But I disagreed. In that moment, I felt like I had become nothing but my mistake. Driving home after hearing I was HIV positive felt different from any route I'd ever taken. The roads I knew by heart seemed foreign, like I was crossing into a new country where the rules were harsher and less forgiving. I rehearsed what I would say to Linda, but every version collapsed under the weight of the truth. I'm sorry felt small, almost insulting. How do you apologize for altering someone's entire future? When I walked to the front door, Linda was at the table, a stack of pamphlets from the doctor spread out before her. She looked up at me, eyes red but dry. Well, she asked. I wanted to lie. For a split second, I considered it. To spare her, to spare myself. But lies had already brought us here. I'm positive, I said. The words landed between us like a dropped plate, shattering something invisible. Linda inhaled sharply, her hand flying to her mouth. For a long moment, we just stared at each other, two strangers holding the ruins of the life we'd built. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was crowded with every question Linda was too stunned to ask. Eventually, one came out, thin and fragile. How? It wasn't a medical question. It was a marital one. I sat down across from her, feeling like I was about to perform my own execution. My throat tightened, but I forced the words out. I told her about the night in Amarillo, the bar, the motel, the instant regret. I didn't dress it up or justify it. I didn't blame the road, the loneliness, or the miles. I said what needed to be said. I betrayed you. Linda's face crumpled, not with rage, but with a grief so deep it felt like the air around us changed. She didn't scream. She didn't throw anything. That might have been easier. Instead, she whispered, "You were my safe place." Tears finally spilled over. I never imagined I could be hurt like this by you. Hearing that was somehow worse than the diagnosis. I hadn't just endangered her health. I had shattered her sense of safety. Guilt became a physical thing after that, a weight pressing on my chest, a constant ache in my bones. I wanted to disappear, to erase myself from her life, so she could heal without having to see the man who had done this to her. But she didn't ask me to leave. She also didn't ask me to stay. We existed in the same house like two storm systems circling each other, both too damaged to merge, too tangled to separate cleanly. We started treatment at around the same time, sitting in separate chairs at the clinic's waiting room, not touching, barely speaking. The staff was kind, using words like manageable long life expectancy and undetectable. They talked about science and progress, about how HIV wasn't the death sentence it used to be. I nodded, grateful, but science couldn't fix what I'd broken. Medicine could teach me how to live with a virus in my blood. It couldn't teach Linda how to live with the betrayal in her heart. At night, lying in the same bed with a canyon of space between us, my mind replayed every crossroad I'd ever had on the road. Every night I'd chosen to call Linda. Every diner where I kept myself. Every decision where I'd said no to temptation. One single yes had undone 1,000 no's. It didn't seem fair, but fairness had nothing to do with it. I realized how fragile the life of a faithful person can be when tied to someone else's moment of weakness. Linda hadn't just gotten sick. Her memory of our past had been infected too. All those anniversaries, those quiet mornings, those promises. It was as if a shadow had fallen over them retroactively. Was it all a lie? She asked me once, her voice trembling. Did you ever really love me? That question cut deeper than any diagnosis. I did. I do. I answered, meaning it with everything in me, but I also knew that love doesn't erase harm. At best, it gives you the courage to face it. We agreed to go to counseling, not because we believed it would fix everything, but because we didn't know what else to do. The therapist's office was small, filled with soft lighting and tissues within arm's reach. She asked us to tell the story from our perspectives. Hearing Linda describe the moment she got her diagnosis, how she felt dirty, ashamed, even though she had done nothing wrong, made my chest burn. I thought HIV was something that happened to people living wild lives, she said. I never imagined it would come through my marriage bed. I wanted to interrupt, to defend myself, to say that it had only been one night, but I realized how pathetic that sounded. One night was enough. One choice was enough. When it was my turn, I spoke about the road, the loneliness, the mental games I had played with myself, convincing myself that feeling healthy meant being safe. The therapist listened, nodding, then said softly, "Loneliness can explain actions. It can't excuse harm." That sentence stuck with me. It still does. As treatment went on, the numbers on our lab reports slowly improved. Viral loads dropped. Our doctors used words like undetectable and controlled. It was strange watching the health side of things stabilize while the emotional side remained volatile. Some days, Linda and I could talk almost like before, sharing jokes, cooking dinner together, even brushing hands without her pulling away. Other days, a small reminder would trigger a fresh wave of anger or sorrow. A TV show mentioning infidelity, a medication reminder alarm, a song we used to dance to. On those days, she would retreat to the bedroom, and I'd sit at the kitchen table alone, staring at my pill bottle. I began attending a support group for people living with HIV. Some had contracted it through needles, some through partners who lied, some through circumstances even harsher than ours. Hearing their stories did something unexpected. It stripped away the shame I had tied to the disease itself and left the real culprit exposed. My choice. The virus was medical. The betrayal was moral. One night after group, I sat in my truck outside our house, engine off, hands resting on the steering wheel just like any other night on the road, except I wasn't miles away. I was parked in my own driveway, afraid to go inside. I thought about how easily I had told myself, "I feel fine," for years, how I had trusted that more than testing, more than facts. It wasn't just ignorance. It was arrogance. I believed I was safe because it was convenient to believe. I thought about the pamphlets I'd seen in clinics, since the one saying, "Know your status, get tested regularly." I had treated those like background noise. Now I saw them as warnings I'd casually ignored. I realized something else. Even if I hadn't cheated as a man on the road, exposed to different environments, I still should have been more proactive with my health. I'd left Linda vulnerable, not just through my mistake, but through my refusal to face uncomfortable possibilities. That realization crushed me as much as the diagnosis. Eventually, Linda and I had to decide what our marriage would be, a shared recovery or a prolonged collapse. She was the one who brought it up, sitting with her hands wrapped around a mug of tea she didn't drink. "I don't know if I can ever feel the same," she said, not looking at me. "But I also know I don't want my whole life defined by this." She took a breath. "If we stay together, things have to be honest. No more secrets. Not about the virus, not about how we're feeling, not about anything." I agreed before she finished. Secrets had nearly destroyed us. I wasn't going to hide behind them again. We made small commitments. Regular counseling, shared medical appointments when possible, weekly check-ins about how we were really doing emotionally, not just physically. It wasn't dramatic. There were no big speeches, no cinematic reconciliation. Just two tired people choosing quietly to try. Staying wasn't forgiveness. Not yet. But it was a decision to leave the door open for it. As the months turned into a year, our lives took on a new kind of normal. We learned the language of lab results, insurance approvals, medication schedules. We also learned the language of boundaries and rebuilding. Linda began volunteering at a local clinic that provided education about HIV and other sexually transmitted infections. The first time she told me, I was surprised. I don't want other people blindsided like I was, she said. If my story can help someone ask for a test or insist on honesty, maybe something good can come from this. Watching her stand in front of groups, calmly explaining how HIV can affect anyone, not just people living recklessly, filled me with a complicated mix of pride and sorrow. I knew that every word she spoke was built on pain I had caused. I decided to do my part too, speaking at support groups for other truck drivers, urging them to get tested, to take loneliness seriously, to understand that feeling healthy isn't a diagnosis. It was the least I could do. There are still nights when I lie awake next to Linda, listening to her breathe, and wonder how our story would have gone if I'd made a different choice that night in Amarillo. But living in those what-ifs doesn't change anything. What I can change is how I live now. I take my medication religiously. I go to every appointment. I treat my health like it's not just mine, but shared. Because when you're in a partnership, your body isn't the only thing at stake. I've learned to say things out loud that I used to bury. When I'm feeling lonely, when I'm struggling, when I'm tempted to numb my emotions instead of facing them. Linda doesn't always respond with warmth, but she responds with honesty, and that's something. We're not the couple we were before. Maybe we never will be. But we're also not the shattered mess we were in those first weeks. We exist somewhere in between, fragile, imperfect, but still here. If there's one thing I've learned from all of this, it's that I feel fine is one of the most dangerous sentences a person can lean on. I felt fine for months after that night. I felt fine when I hugged my wife, when I kissed her, when I shared a bed with her. Feeling fine didn't mean I was safe. It just meant I was ignorant of the harm already moving silently through my blood. I can't rewrite what happened. I can't give Linda back the unshaken trust she once had in me or the sense of invincibility she once had about her health. But I can tell the truth. I can tell men like me, men on the road, men in long marriages, men who think one mistake won't matter, that we're wrong. One moment of weakness can echo through someone else's body, someone else's life. If my story does anything, I hope it pushes someone to get tested, to be honest, to choose differently before they ever have to sit where I've sat and watch the person they love pay for their silence. Quick reflection. Raymond's story is a painful reminder of how one moment of loneliness can unravel a lifetime of trust. What began as a brief lapse, a single night blurred by exhaustion and emotional vulnerability, turned into a life-altering consequence not only for him, but for Linda, who had done nothing to deserve the burden placed upon her. His journey through guilt, confession, treatment, and slow rebuilding shows how fragile relationships are when honesty is replaced by silence. It also reveals an often ignored truth. HIV does not discriminate. It doesn't always come with symptoms, warnings, or stereotypes. It can enter a home where faithfulness existed, carried unknowingly by someone who believed feeling fine was enough. In the end, the story is about accountability, compassion, and facing consequences with humility. It reminds us that healing, whether emotional or medical, requires truth, courage, and a willingness to rebuild even when the foundation is cracked. Moral lessons. 1. One moment can change everything. A single decision made in weakness can carry consequences far beyond the moment, affecting the lives, bodies, and futures of those we love. 2. Feeling fine is not protection. HIV can live silently for years. Regular testing is essential, especially in relationships where emotional distance or long separations create hidden risks. 3. Secrets are more dangerous than mistakes. Honesty, even when painful, protects far more than silence ever can. Concealment turns one wrong choice into a chain of harm. For love cannot erase harm, but can guide healing. Rebuilding trust takes time, transparency, and consistent effort. Love is not a cure, but a reason to fight for recovery. 5. Responsibility is shared, even when blame is not. Our health choices affect our partners, families, and communities. Carelessness with our own well-being can endanger others who rely on us. 6. Forgiveness is a journey, not a guarantee. It must be earned, not demanded. Healing after betrayal requires patience, accountability, and true remorse. 7. Prevention begins with conversation. Talking openly about testing, loneliness, temptation, and boundaries can protect relationships from silent risks. Thanks for watching. Please leave comments. Like, share, and subscribe so that you will be the first to be notified of our next video, coming up very soon.